welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am here today with the author of a book that you are going to be obsessed with, because I am obsessed with it. It has like literally everything I love in it. So much. It's like a buffet of amazing. Welcome, Sara Wolf. Tell us about it. Hi.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sara Wolf. I am a New York Times bestselling author of fantasy, romance / sci-fi. It's nice to meet everybody. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
It is, again, like I said, like it's fabulous to have you here because this book went so fast for me because I absolutely loved everything about it. The world was just so much fun to sort of get into, and there were so many characters that I loved. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Heavenbreaker and the world that Sonali lives in and where the story came from for you?
Yeah. So Heavenbreaker is a revenge story about a girl who rides in giant robot space jousting tournaments to avenge her murdered mother against the space station's nobility. So it's a lot of concepts, but basically at its heart, it's a revenge story. It was such an interesting way that it came about because I really like giant robots. Like I just really like them. I've always liked them. The first time I ever saw them, I think was in anime and manga, right? But like then Pacific Rim.
What was your first mecha series? Because for me it was Gundam Wing, so I have to know.
Oh, Gundam Wing is such a good one. So for me, it was actually Magic Knight Rayearth. It's not technically a giant robot like series, but they in the second season or like the second sort of like installation of Magic Knight Rayearth, they got these cool giant robots, and I was like, oh man, those are awesome. So that was my very first, like very, very, very first giant robot introduction. And then I think Zoids came along. I think Zoids was sort of happening at the same time, like on the show Zoids, and that's like animal robots, and those are really cool to me.
Magic Knight Rayearth is beautiful, and that's true. It does Magic Knight Rayearth, and I have to say, like, there's some genre bending in that, and I think that I could certainly understand how you as the author of Heavenbreaker would be a fan of that, because I think that was one of the first magical girl series that I saw, which really played with it. It wasn't, as a Sailor Moon fan, of course I love magical girls, but
she's very straightforward. Sailor Moon's very straightforward.
Exactly. And Rayearth, there's a little bit more going on there, and there is a little bit of that sci-fi tinge. So I totally see that. But go on, giant robots, Zoids I also love too, I will say. Zoids was one of those series that I woke up really early to watch.
Same. So Zoids, and then I think as I started getting older, like Pacific Rim came about, right? And like giant robots have always just been there. I think Big O is one of the series that I used to watch like late at night on Toonami, was like Big O, and that had
Another
a giant robot. And like the robots, the cool thing about Big O is that the giant robots will like judge you like when you try to pilot them. So if you're not worthy, the giant robots will be like, you have been judged not worthy by God, and then you'll get smited and then you'll die instantly. Like it's so hardcore and awesome. Like Big O was very formative. I mean, Code Geass, when it came along, it had giant robots, and that was sort of like in high school I was like really into Code Geass, and that had a lot of giant robots that were super cool. And then I started getting like into the more serious stuff, like obviously like Gundam, right? I just finished Iron Blooded Orphans, which was a really good series. And I'm about to start Witch from Mercury, so I'm very excited.
That one I still have to watch Witch from Mercury. I have been told that it is fabulous, though.
Yeah, I'm so excited for it. Yeah. Evangelion, I think I watched when I was in quarantine. I think the first time I ever watched Evangelion, and for me, like I don't like Evangelion, but I love the robots. Like that is the robots are just the best. Like I can see why they made like so many, like it's why it's so popular. Like the robots are just so cool. Cause I never before kind of encountered like spoilers for Evangelion, it's been around forever, but like organic robots, right? Like that concept kind of like blew my mind. I was like, oh, the robots are also organic, and they didn't look like the robots I was used to, right? Like they looked more like Magic Knight Rayearth robots than say like Gundam robots, right? So I really liked Evangelion for the robots and only the robots. Everything else about it I didn't like that much. But yeah, so like Evangelion kind of introduced the concept of like organic robots to me. And then I started dabbling into other like Western giant robot media. There's actually a game called Battletech, and Battletech is a strategy game where it's very medieval. It's like houses have giant robots, and like you fight for like, territory and honor and all that stuff. So Battletech is very much, the concept of Battletech really tickled the back of my brain, like mixing medieval with like giant robots. That sort of Battletech sort of like kind of inspired that. And yeah, so that's where we are now. It's like I kind of was like, you know what, the story of the giant robots needs to be like couched in a revenge story, right? Because giant robots is a very foreign concept to a lot of people, but a revenge story is not. So I was like, okay, well, we can do this giant robot story. We just need to couch it in something people are very familiar with, and that's very familiar and like grounded. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, I have to say, like all of my notes kind of, you checked all of the boxes of the things that I was wondering about. And I used to play Battletech too. So I am, yeah, and I hadn't thought about it until just a second ago when you mentioned it.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. There was, I think there's a lot of all of that stuff that's good. And the characters in the story and the world of the story just feels very tangible, likely because, revenge really is a bit of a universal story.
Yeah.
It's something that I think everybody can, if not relate to personally, they understand. And Sonali has lost her mother. And she knows that her father is the one, her father being, the head of a household. Her father is the one who is responsible, that Sonali was the one who was supposed to also perish with her mother. And she is absolutely freaking determined to destroy her father and his house.
Yeah.
And that's where we meet her, but that's not necessarily the whole route that the story takes, because she ends up sort of being found by somebody who seems to have interests that align with her, and will train her to be like a knight to pilot one of these giant robots, or steeds. She's a rider, and I loved that whole concept of medievalism in space. I don't think that can ever possibly get old, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Star Wars did it, right? Like the Jedi are just knights.
They are, and Star Wars is not hard science fiction. It really is. Like it's considered science fiction, but it really
it's
is
very
science
soft
fantasy. Yeah, it is. It is very soft. It is science fantasy. There's a lot of religion and mysticism, and Lucas was a fan of the samurai movies, which a lot.
Akira Kurosawa.
Akira Kurosawa, yes, like his whole the wipes and the transitions that he uses are 100% Kurosawa Hidden Fortress. So I think that we've been craving stories like Heavenbreaker for quite a while, and I think that you bring up Star Wars, but I think that just the appeal of it, most people, when that was coming out, I don't think that they understood that it was going to be the empire that it is. But I think a lot of us crave that fantasy and that mysticism in our science fiction, and Heavenbreaker does it really, really well. Sonali is a really great character to introduce us to this world. She's very raw when we meet her, and it's a point that I think makes her actions, however you might see them, as at least understandable. And there are so many other really great characters in the story as well. So was she the first one that came to you when you started conceiving of Heavenbreaker?
Yeah. So I definitely knew I needed a female lead character because I write almost exclusively female lead characters. And I knew that she would have to pilot a robot for a reason, a giant robot for a reason, right? And I knew that, like, because this is sci-fi, because this is my first foray into sci-fi, what I really excel at as a writer, or at least I think I really excel at as a writer, is character and character development, and grounding a story within a character's like thoughts and feelings. So the character is really the vehicle for the story to move forward for me in a lot of ways. And I excel at, I think I excel at character growth and character representations and stuff like that. Just like making characters that feel real. So I knew I had to make her as relatable as possible. And there's a couple different ways that you can go about that as a writer. You can do the underdog story, whereas it's like you start from nothing, right? And you claw your way to the top. It's very like it's a very like yeah, it's very underdog type story. I usually use Game of Thrones as like a comparison for this, like the characters. Like Jaime Lannister starts at the top, but he falls and then he has to have his redemption arc, right? Like that's a good way to start a character. The underdog would be somebody like Tyrion Lannister, right, where nobody expects anything of him, but he manages to become powerful in his own right through his own power in his own different ways. And then you have Jon Snow, who is what like the character archetype I call like the outcast, right? Where it's like they have literally nothing. They're not the underdog. The underdog has something going for them, but they're not quite there yet. The outcast has literally nothing, starts with literally zero, and becomes like there's a power creep, right, to the outcast character, and they eventually become very, very powerful. But you see it happen along the way. And then the fourth type I would say is the Arya Stark type, where it's revenge, right? Like revenge is the prime motivator. So there's these different ways that you can sort of create a very, very relatable character. You can make them start from the bottom. You can make them fall from grace. You can make them trying to claw their way up like the underdog. And then you can have the revenge character. So I settled on the revenge because revenge in itself is a very pure emotion. It's not really, it can become diluted, but revenge is such a understandable motivation to a lot of people because we all sort of want revenge in some way or another. Like if something wrongs us, we want revenge, right? But we know socially it's not acceptable to get it. So people like to see a character, they like to live viscerally through a character who is getting revenge on their behalf, so to speak, because you know we enjoy the fantasy of like seeing somebody take action when in the real world it's actually very hard to take action like that, and is you know sometimes not appropriate. It's very frequently not appropriate. So yeah, a character that's on a revenge journey is always something that people can relate to, I think. So yeah, I grounded her very specifically in revenge.
Yeah, and then you have Morel, who I actually ended up liking.
Yeah.
I really liked her. She was
Yeah.
I don't want to give too much away. You know, she's you learn really early on she's a natural foil for Sonali. She really, you know, she was raised in the Hot Claire family?
Yeah, Hot Claire.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if I was pronouncing it correctly. So Sonali was raised in the Hot Claire family. She really is a noble, but there's so much more to her upbringing. And you know, Morel was raised in that family, and she would be the one to really resent Sonali, and you can kind of understand when you just sort of learn her upbringing why she wouldn't get it as much.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so it was good because I liked both characters, but at the same time, it was just such a natural rivalry. And then I couldn't help but love Rain. That whole child assassin. I think we're all kind of a sucker for that type of story and that type of character.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked Morel. Yeah, she originally she was going to be a guy. But I started writing it and I was like, oh no, there's too much tension here. They're related, right? So Morel, no matter what, Morel was going to be related to Sonali, whether or not she was a guy. And I realized like, oh, there's no way that that forms a love triangle, right? Like that forms a love triangle, but also their family. So it's very weird. Like they're distant cousins, right? Essentially. So I was like, maybe I won't do that. So she ended up being a girl because I just thought that was more interesting. But also there is like this weird undertone between Sonali and Morel. Like they are such good foils for each other. Like you said, they're such good foils. They're almost like perfect foils for each other, that there's almost a bit of like homoerotic tension there. Like one of my beta readers was like, are they going to make out? And I'm like, no, girl, they're family.
Me too.
Yeah. Like they're family, girl. They're not going to make out. So like that was, but like, I liked exploring that because when you meet somebody who's so similar to you at your core, because they're both such determined girls, they're so determined. They both have this iron willpower, and they're both like so set that they have the right view on things, that like there is the friction is just so incredible between them. And I'm so excited to see them like grow and change in the second book. But like, yeah, it's just, I love Morel so much. She's so cool. I wanted to make, every character sort of represents a different aspect of like the story themes, right? So like Morel is the knight, right? Like then what it means to be a knight, that's what Morel is focused on. And that's what defines her entire character. So I tried to go into it making characters who would be affected by writing in different ways. So I made Sonali the character who is reluctantly writing, right? And then Rax is the character, well, not reluctantly. I made Sonali the character who is writing for a purpose and no other reason. And then I made Rax the reluctant writer who's been through a lot of like trauma. He represents all the trauma that comes with writing. And then Morel is like the honor and the accolade that comes with writing, the pride that comes with writing, right? And then Rain is somebody who's not affected by writing at all. He represents the common person and how they are affected by writing, and like writing tournaments and like giant robots, like the whole thing. He represents the common person who has nothing to do with it, but is still affected by it in some way, right? Like on the TV screens, or like he sees it, people are talking about it. He represents the common man. So yeah, all four characters sort of represent like an aspect of these giant robots and how they affect the world, so to speak.
So is there any nods, anything you can tell us about what we will see coming up without giving spoilers?
Yeah. So like Hellrunner is the second book after Heavenbreaker. I'm excited for it. But yeah, I think the book itself is going to start with a heist. Oh, yeah, it's planned to start with a heist. And then the finals have to happen. The tournament finals are going to happen in Hellrunner. And Snelly has to learn how to really truly ride. Not just like force her way through. In the first book in Heavenbreaker, she sort of stumbles and like fails and sort of gets her groove towards the end. But in Hellrunner, she has to become a real writer. And so I'm excited to see how that journey is going to go. There's going to be a lot of making out in the second book. Let's just say.
Yeah, I actually was curious. When you write, do you sit down and the story and characters take you on a journey, or do you know what's going to happen immediately?
I know the ending. So usually when I write a book, I know the ending and I know the beginning. But between that, I try not to plot too much, because once I plot something, my brain thinks that I've written the entire book and that it's done, and then I can walk away. So I force my brain to like go on the journey without plotting or planning anything. That way I'm surprised. It keeps me entertained, essentially. It keeps my brain interested in what's going to happen next. So yeah, I just know the beginning and the end, and then I sort of just roll from there.
What got you writing? Like how did you start? How did you cut your teeth as a writer?
It was in like the fan fiction writing forums back in the day. I wrote a bunch of fanfic. I think my biggest one is 1.2 million words, so that's exciting. I was 12 years old.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was 12 years old and I had nothing to do. From the time I was 12 to the time I was 17, I wrote this fanfic, and then that sort of taught me to sit down and write for extended periods of time. How I really learned to write, though, I think was just by writing books like repeatedly. You have to do it in order to get good at it, as much as that sucks. As much as like you want to be good right off the bat, right? But for writing, it's like you have to keep writing, you have to keep failing, you have to keep succeeding to sort of gauge what you're good at, what your strengths are, and what you want to do with writing specifically. For Heavenbreaker, I knew that this was a gamble. This is everything I'm scared of, essentially. Heavenbreaker is a sci-fi novel, right? I've never written sci-fi before, and it was very intimidating to me. Heavenbreaker has multiple POVs, which I've always been like dissuaded from doing as a writer, because people just say like it takes them out, or so, something along those lines. So I was scared of multiple POVs, especially third-person POVs. This book essentially encapsulates everything I'm afraid of, and my attempt to become better through my own fear. If that makes sense. So
it does. Yeah, absolutely. No, it was wonderful. I think it's going to be a huge hit. I will certainly be recommending it to a lot of people. It is so good. When any ideas as to when we will see the next one, and how long you're going to want to spend in this world?
Yeah. So my publisher actually asked the same question a couple months ago. They were like, hey, when are you going to have the manuscript for Hellrunner? And I was like, well, I got back to them and I said, I'm not going to think about it. I would like to not think about it until Heavenbreaker comes out. I would like to not think about Hellrunner until Heavenbreaker comes out. So usually I like to give myself a bit of space between like ending a book and then starting the sequel, so that I can forget the manuscript of the first one. Because when you've read a manuscript so many times, I think I read this manuscript at least like 21 times in total, with different versions, it's hard to keep it all straight in your brain, and you start to lose the forest for the trees, so to speak. So I try to give myself a little bit of space, like at least a month, maybe 2 months, to completely forget, or at least sort of forget the manuscript, and then come back to it with fresh eyes, read it, and then start writing the sequel, start thinking about the sequel and writing it. So yeah, I'm excited. It should be, I'm going to start it once Heavenbreaker's out. So like next 2 weeks. And we'll see. Heavenbreaker took me about 2 months to write, 3 months to write. The revisions were much longer though. Yeah. The revisions were much longer. The revisions were like a year, I want to say. So, I think Hellrunner will probably take me a similar amount of time, maybe 4 months. But the revisions are where I'm usually the second book is easier than the first, right? Because the first sets the story, and the second you kind of just roll the ball downhill, so to speak. So yeah, it should be easier than Heavenbreaker. And then yeah, I think because in this story there are 6 other stations. So Heavenbreaker is one of 7 space stations that got flung across the galaxy, not even the galaxy, the entire universe. So there are 6 other human space stations out there somewhere, trying to survive. So I think it would be cool to like Heavenbreaker itself, this space station only has like 2 books, I think, Heavenbreaker and Hellrunner. But there are other space stations, like I was thinking of doing one where it's like one of the space stations fell into a water world, and like pirates, like piracy is a thing. Yeah, so like giant robots meets pirates. Like again, mashing this like medieval or like this old timey era with like near future, or not near future, far future sci-fi. I think it would be pretty interesting. So I think piracy would be the next one that we could mash giant robots with. So that would be fun. We'll see how Heavenbreaker does. It all depends on how it does.
Well, thank you so much. Check out Heavenbreaker. It was awesome. You're gonna love it. Thank you, Sara Wolf. And we are gonna close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.